Mike, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. Now, I am of the opinion, I told you this over the last couple of weeks, but I'm of the opinion, unfortunately, that we might be looking at a situation in college football where a lot of big non-con games are going to go away. We've already seen over the last couple of months a lot of big non-con games scheduled for the next few years be canceled. Now, I know that there's this story out there about the Big Ten and the SEC possibly coming up with some sort of schedule arrangement or something like that. And while I would love that, unfortunately, I don't put any faith in it, and I don't believe it until I actually see it. We've seen sort of handshake arrangements like this in the past with other conferences, and they just never really amount to anything or come to anything. So we better enjoy these non-con games while they last. And fortunately, this season, we've got a ton of big non-con games. So if it's all right with y'all, I'm going to talk about some actual college football today instead of complaining about the whole host of manure that has been dumped in our lap as college football fans over the last couple of months and really over the last 4 or 5 years. We're going to talk about some actual college football today. I will be live tonight at 8 o'clock. That's going to be a Patreon stream. There's a Georgia versus Texas basketball game. And I don't follow college basketball all that closely, but unless I'm betting on a game, I don't watch it. But I forget what game it was I was watching a couple of nights ago, and at halftime they were talking about the NCAA tournament, which of course I love to watch every year. And they said that they have their bracketology guy or whatever it is on there, and he said that right now Texas is the last team in the tournament, and Georgia is the first team out of the tournament. Well, Georgia and Texas play tonight at 8 o'clock in Austin. I am going to bet on the game. I'm betting on Texas. Again, I don't know all that much about college basketball. I do tend to favor the home team, especially in significant matchups. And I guess this is a significant matchup if it's basically a play-in game for both teams. If Georgia wins, you know, maybe they hop over Texas and find a way to get into the tournament. If they lose, all hopes are gone, I guess, and Texas would get in. But anyway, so I'll be live on Patreon tonight at 8 o'clock. But let's talk about some of these games because there are some great ones. And I want to start with the Alabama and Florida State game. By the way, my schedule previews are starting this week too. So, I do this every March. We just pull up the schedule of 20 or 30 teams or whatever. We go through the schedules, try to figure out what are the tough games, trap games, back-to-back road games. Are there any? What are the non-con games, rivalry game, whatever, tough game? We just sort of start to get an idea in our mind of how a team might perform, right? Because the schedule is a big part of it, of how how you think a team might do over the course of the season. So I usually start by doing a series of schedule previews. Those will start this week. And I think I'm going to start with these two teams. Alabama plays at Florida State on August 30th. Now, this is the first time these teams have played since 2017, I believe it was. Bama beat them. Technically, Florida State has never beat Bama. Now, they did play a game in 08 or 09, I think it was, or something like that, and Alabama won the game. But shortly after that, Florida State won the game. But shortly, this is one of Bobby Bowden's last years in Tallahassee, but shortly after that, Florida State admitted to a cheating scandal, and Florida State, not the NCAA, Florida State voluntarily vacated all their wins from a couple of seasons, and that was one of the seasons. So although they have beaten Alabama on the field, technically they don't hold any wins all time against Alabama. Alabama goes on the road to Tallahassee on August 30th. Both of these teams a little disappointing last year relative to expectations. Now, obviously, Alabama was a way better team last year than Florida State. Everybody was a way better team than Florida State. I think last year's Florida State team might be the worst power conference team in the history of college football. When you look at how down the ACC was overall, it wasn't a great conference. And then you realize that Florida State only managed to go 2-10 in that while being in that conference. Just absolutely pathetic, pitiful, piss poor, and sad. Now, I don't expect Florida State to be that bad again this year, and Alabama's a little bit of a mystery. Kalen DeBoer's second year, they're going to have a brand new quarterback. I guess, is it going to be Ty Simpson? I don't think it's going to be Austin Mack. There's some talk about that. He came down from Washington with Kalen DeBoer. I think it's probably going to be Ty Simpson, but anyway, we're not getting into game predictions here. Alabama will be a favorite, I think, on the road in Tallahassee. A lot of question marks for Florida State because they have sort of gone all in the last few years on the portal approach, and that's hit or miss. It's a home run or a strikeout, really. There's not a lot of doubles in the portal. You look at Ole Miss. They've hit a couple of home runs in a couple of years in a row in the portal and 10-plus wins. You have Florida State a few years ago, home run in the portal, they win the ACC. Then you have last year, complete swing and a miss, a whiff, a strikeout in the portal for Florida State. They wind up 2-10. So very interesting game. Two big brands of the world of college football. Alabama on the road at Florida State. And how about this? You're going to see Alabama on this list again. They play Wisconsin too. So how far back do we have to go to find a season where Alabama played two power non-con opponents in the same regular season? Not a lot of teams do that anywhere, so that's not just a knock on Bama. Generally, the teams that do that tend to be the teams that have non-con rivalry games. Take Georgia, for example. Georgia plays Georgia Tech at the end of every year. So there's a lot of seasons where Georgia plays two power non-con opponents, like, for example, Clemson in the beginning of the year, Oregon in the beginning of the year, North Carolina a few years ago in the beginning of the year, and then they always wrap up with Georgia Tech at the end. So in years like that, Georgia plays two. Same thing with like Florida, for example, plays Florida State at the end of every season. That's a non-con rivalry game. Florida also plays a lot of times early in the season another power opponent. Last year they played Miami. This year they play Miami again. So there are other teams that do it, but I don't know if I can remember a case where Alabama has done that, primarily because their end of season rival, Auburn, is a conference game. So if Alabama's going to play two power non-con opponents, typically it would have to be in the first part of the season. You just don't see that too often. You see it this year, Alabama playing on the road at Florida State before hosting Wisconsin a couple of weeks later. What else is on here? Florida at Miami, a rematch from last year. I think this is an important game for both teams. Miami obviously wants to get off to a fast start to try to repeat some of the success they had last year. Obviously, they'd like to have more. They sort of collapsed at the end of the year with two unexplainable losses to Georgia Tech and Syracuse, which, of course, meant they did not make the ACC title game and got left out of the playoffs. Florida got blown out in this game last year, and it looked like the end for Billy Napier. Fortunately for the rest of college football, and unfortunately for Florida fans, because these schools have to start paying the players $20 million a year now, Florida can't afford Billy Napier's buyout, so they have to keep him again this year. But this is as close to a must-win game, I think, for Billy Napier as he's had in his entire career. Florida's got a brutal conference schedule again. In fact, Florida plays at Miami on September 20th, which I believe is week 4 this season. It's either week 3 or week 4. But Florida plays on the road at Miami. Guess who Florida plays the week before that? LSU. Guess where? On the road at LSU. So back-to-back road games in September here for Florida at LSU and at Miami. They've got to split those. I mean, look, I know it's the offseason, and if you're a Florida fan, you think you're winning both of those games, and maybe you do. I don't know. DJ Lagway's never lost a game that he started and didn't get hurt in, and the weather was between 68 and 74, and there was at least 85% capacity in the stand. I know all those weird stats you throw out about Lagway, but in reality, it feels like Florida's got to split those for them to have any shot at anything later in the year. And by anything, I mean making a bowl game or Billy Napier retaining his job, because it's just the same brutal stretch of games for Florida this coming season that they had last year. For Miami, important game here. Carson Beck comes in a transfer from Georgia after Miami loses Cam Ward. And while that's getting all the headlines, because quarterback, flashy position, everybody always wants to talk about the quarterback. For Miami, it's going to come down to defense, not specifically in this game here at home against Florida, but just overall the course of the season. Carson Beck's going to put up video game numbers over the course of the season down there at Miami. How do I know that? Well, he did it at Georgia against SEC competition. I don't have any doubt in my mind at all that Carson Beck is not going to be the reason if Miami falls short this year. It'll be the defense like it was last year. They have got a ton of work to do on that side of the ball. If they haven't improved any, and Florida's offense has progressed enough in year 2 under DJ Lagway, Florida could go down there and give Miami a game, but that'll be interesting. That's on September 20th. You got Kansas and Missouri, an old Big 12 matchup early in the year this year, September 6th. Baylor at SMU. Former Southwest Conference rivals from way back in the day. Baylor taking on SMU. SMU, of course, in the ACC now. That game on September 6th. SMU with a really good year last year, making the playoffs. Not only their first year in the ACC, their first year as a Power 5 team, but Baylor at SMU September 6th. Kansas at Missouri, also on September 6th. How about a couple of SEC versus Big Ten matchups early in the season? And I'm talking about matchups involving some of the biggest names in the history of college football. Michigan on the road at Oklahoma. on September 6th. And then, of course, we've got Texas at Ohio State on August 30th. And I haven't even, I think I mentioned it earlier, Alabama hosts Wisconsin. So you've got several SEC versus Big Ten matchups early in the season. Let's start with the what's probably the one people are looking forward to the most. Texas on the road at Ohio State. 2 new quarterbacks in this game, and this game is played on August 30th, early in the season. So we're going to find out real quick about these 2 quarterbacks, Arch Manning at Texas, and who is it, I guess, Julian Sayin at Ohio State. We'll see. But this is the first game of a home-and-home series between these 2. They play again next year in Austin at Texas. And these programs meet for the first time since 2009, 4th time they've played all time. This should be a great game. Both of these teams are ranked in the top 5 of everybody's preseason rankings and preseason polls. If you look at like odds to make the playoffs or odds to win the national title, both of these teams are in the top 4 in those categories as well. They're absolutely loaded on both sides of the ball with NFL talent. But early season matchups, you never really know what you're going to get. And 2 new quarterbacks here with Arch Manning and probably, I guess, Julian Sayin at Ohio State. But a massive game here, August 30th, Texas and Ohio State. And then you take a look at that Michigan and Oklahoma game a week later on September 6th. This is actually the first time these 2 teams have ever played in the regular season. And that blew my mind when I read that. Michigan and Oklahoma, of course, been around forever when it comes to the world of college football. Never once have they played in the regular season. That ends on September 6th this year when Michigan travels to Norman to take on the Sooners. Again, 2 teams here with brand new quarterbacks. I'm under the impression Michigan's going to roll with Bryce Underwood. We'll see what happens over the course of spring ball. And then, of course, summer camps and fall workouts. But it looks like Bryce Underwood, the true freshman phenom, is probably going to get the job at Michigan. Oklahoma, of course, has gone to the portal after they ran Jackson Arnold out of town when he was benched 3 or 4 different times last season. So, again, 2 new quarterbacks, just like with Texas and Ohio State. While these 2 teams aren't getting the offseason hype that Texas and Ohio State are getting, these are 2 teams that underperformed last year relative to expectations and talent, right? And both have expectations by their fan bases and some in the media of taking big steps forward in terms of overall record in 2025. Now, we'll see, right? This is early in the season, week 2 or 3, September 6th. But I think this is going to be a really, really good game here. We'll see how it goes. Notre Dame at Miami. Not a conference game. Now, these 2 teams have a history, of course, Catholics, convicts, a bunch of great games from back in the 80s and 90s. And they have played several times recently as well, because of the agreement Notre Dame has with the ACC to play 4 or 5 ACC teams a year. So while this isn't a game we see every year, and it's not technically a conference game within the ACC, it is a game we've seen a few times over the last few years. But Rudy, fresh off a playoff appearance and loss in the national championship game, travels to take on the Hurricanes early in the season. That'll be a good one. Oklahoma State at Oregon. Oh, boy. This is going to be brutal and ugly. I think Oregon's one of the best teams in the country. Again, a new quarterback again. It seems to be a theme here with a lot of these big teams. So I should do a video on that too. But you start take a look at anybody's top 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. A new quarterback for almost all of them. Georgia's got a new quarterback this year. Ohio State's got a new quarterback this year. Texas has a new quarterback this year. Oregon with a new quarterback this year. But Oklahoma State and Gundy, they have been circling the drain the last couple of years. Really bad last year. There is no excuse for Oklahoma State being as bad as they were last year. They had one of the most veteran offensive lines in the country. They were all 6th-year seniors. They had one of the best running backs in the country in Ollie Gordon, and they were just absolutely horrendous last year. He took a pay cut. You don't see that very often in the world of college football or really anywhere, but he took a pay cut to keep the job there at Oklahoma State. But this feels like a year where Oklahoma State's got to win 8 or 9 games, doesn't it? I mean, Gundy's been there a long time. It feels like it's a kind of a been there, done that type of thing with him. You kind of, I don't know. There seems like a ceiling under Gundy at Oklahoma State right now. And I don't know, maybe a change would be what's best there. And I don't say that because I don't like Gundy. In fact, the opposite is true. I like Gundy. He's entertaining. His press conferences are funny. They just seem to be running out of steam there, and I have a feeling Oregon at home is going to steamroll Oklahoma State. South Carolina and Virginia Tech. South Carolina has all the offseason hype this season, it seems like, that Virginia Tech had last year. Virginia Tech, of course, did not meet those expectations. They were a disappointment after a lot of people, myself included, had them pegged to potentially challenge for the ACC championship. That, of course, did not happen. South Carolina, Lenore Sellers, their first-year starting quarterback last year, had a really good year, got better as the season went along. Beat Clemson at the end of the year. They were a fringe playoff contending team, sort of a bubble team, right? They were sort of that group of 3 teams that got left out when you talk about, 4, I guess. Alabama, Miami, South Carolina, and Ole Miss were sort of the 4 teams that were sitting there all trying to make a case, hey, we should be in. It didn't quite get in. So a lot of expectations, I think, for South Carolina this year under Beamer, head coach. They should beat Virginia Tech, I would think, or at least be a significant favorite. TCU at North Carolina on August 30th. This will give us our first look at Bill Belichick roaming the sidelines as a Tar Heel. Outside of that, not much interest in that game, I don't think. Texas A&M at Notre Dame. This is part 2, right? Notre Dame traveled down to College Station and beat Texas A&M on opening weekend last season. This year on September 13th, 2 or 3 weeks into the season, Texas A&M returns the favor. They take a trip up to South Bend to take on Rudy and the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Feels like Texas A&M needs to win that game, doesn't it? Will they? Probably not. Hard to pick Texas A&M to win a big game. Tulane at Ole Miss. Not even sure why that's on the list. I mean, I like Tulane, or a decent group of 5 team, but Ole Miss at home should handle business there. Utah at UCLA again. Cam Rising's back for his 14th year, whatever it is, at Utah, UCLA. I mean, I ask people to name every Big Ten team. They won't name UCLA. They're just to forget. UCLA has become like the new, Illinois or Northwestern or something. Like, you ask people to start naming teams in a certain conference, there's just certain teams they never name. They're just like, they're not winning. They're not Florida State. They're not going 2-10 so that everybody knows how bad they are and is laughing at them. But they're never, you're never talking about them in November either. They're just kind of a forgettable kind of program there. But I don't know. Utah at UCLA, that's amazing. Utah at Wyoming again. You scratch your head. Why is this on the list there? But anyway, those are some of the bigger. There's a million other non-conference games we could point out. The rivalry games at the end of the season: Florida, Florida State, Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, blah blah blah. But this is just a handful of early season non-con games to sort of keep our minds focused on college football. It's easy to get distracted in the offseason. There's a million other things going on. And even in the world of college football, most of the news we get or hear about this time of year tends to be bad news. One of your players got arrested. Somebody got hurt. Somebody got kicked off the team. They're expanding the playoffs to 112 teams so that Florida can get in eventually. More conference realignment, whatever it is, right? Lawsuits from Florida State and Clemson against the ACC and their mother and ESPN or whatever. I get tired of that crap. It's good to sit down sometimes and just talk some actual college football. So even though these games are, still 6 months away, it does feel good to sit down and talk about some actual college football. So thinking about all these big non-con games we've got coming up the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, hopefully will keep me and you going over the next 4 or 5 months as we look forward to the 2025 college football season. All right, once again, I will be on tonight at 8 o'clock on Patreon. The link to the Patreon page is in the description of the video. If you've never joined Patreon, consider checking it out. It's $10 a month. We do the live stream every week, off-season, regular season, postseason, doesn't matter. Every single week, we do a Patreon stream. We have a really good time hanging out over there, and it's a great way to help support the show and the channel. And I tell the Patreon people all the time, I don't know how often I mention it outside of Patreon, but without Patreon, I'll just be honest, I have a successful channel here. I'm extremely lucky. I have built the community that I have here on YouTube of diehard college football fans that are willing to listen to an idiot like me talk about college football, but it's hard in the offseason. And without the support I get through the Patreon page, I probably wouldn't be able to do this full time. So big shout out to everybody who is over there on the Patreon page. And if you've ever thought about joining or signing up, click the link down below. It'll give you all the information you need. And I look forward to seeing you tonight at 8 o'clock over on the Patreon page. We'll hang out and talk some college football. All right, appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.